wish I was there, but I have COVID, and Tim has COVID, and Annalise has COVID. So far, very easy for us. I don't mean to make light of it because I know so many people have died, and my father-in-law was in the hospital for 4 days, so I know it can be serious. It just hasn't been so far for us. I'm on day 3. Feels like a little head cold for me. I can still breathe fine. Got a little junky, and I had a headache. It hurt to move my eyes, but that's gone. But if I look straight ahead, I would be fine. But if I looked up or to the side, it hurts a little bit still right through here. And it does that with my husband too. So it's really weird, this really weird eye headache. Annalise is 17, so she's your age and very young and healthy, and all she had was a stuffy nose. And her stuffy nose is like nothing in Tennessee in the fall, right? Everybody has a stuffy nose. So we thought nothing of it. She had 0 symptoms except a stuffy nose. So she had that for a while, and then all of a sudden she lost taste and smell, and we went, that's weird. Maybe we should go get you tested. So we took her straight to get tested. Took 4 days for that to come back, and that came back positive. And then a few days after that is when Tim and I started getting a little sick. So Sunday night, maybe, we started feeling like something's just not right. It feels like a little head cold. He has more of body aches. That's his sign. I haven't had body aches, but he couldn't even sleep last night because he was so sore. None of us have had coughing yet, so I hope that we can keep it out of our lungs. The saddest part is I have also lost taste and smell. So eating a chocolate donut, I couldn't taste a thing, and that was really sad. It looked really good, and you can still taste texture, but nothing, and it was sad. Tim can still taste and smell, so he's like letting us know how good the food is, and me and Annalise are just like nothing, can't taste a thing. So anyway, so far Leah hasn't gotten it. We're keeping her in her room to try to keep her from getting it. She's not very happy because she feels like she's the one quarantined, but we're just trying to keep her from getting it. So hopefully it won't get any worse than this, because it's really, for me, it hasn't been bad. So I hope it doesn't last long. Alright, so we have talked about the amendments, right? So we are going to review the first 10, because that way you can just watch this video again for review of your final. So we're going to just review really quick. So the first amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition. 2. That's going to be the Second Amendment, your right to bear arms. Remember, a well-regulated militia in case you have to fight your government. So Robert, you asked a question last week about what about the difference between the looting people, like if they think they're fighting their government. So I did some research into it, and a lot of people think that's exactly what's going to happen, is that it might eventually turn into a civil war. Hopefully not. But if it did, they have the right to bear arms, right? Now that doesn't mean they're going to have the right to not get caught or to get arrested, because the government is going to, if there was a big rising up and people trying to separate the president, whoever the president is at the time, their job is to keep the union together, right? So even during this Civil War, Lincoln, although he really wanted to outlaw slavery, and in fact he did, his main goal was to keep the Union together. And so that was his main purpose, was to not have 2 separate United States, right? But there was also somebody on a network this week that said, hey, what if President Trump told all of his supporters to take their guns and take to the street and protest this election and I guess go against the government? Well, they could. I mean, they could, but the government is going to just send the army down and put a stop to that. Remember, in both times when we have had to fight our government, there has been like generals. Like we had General Washington who commanded these armies to go against Britain, and we had General Lee and General Grant, and we had generals that fought for that. So if it ever got to another civil war, then they're going to have to be a little bit more, I don't know, put together leadership-wise to fight if they're going to plan on fighting the government, because looting and even people on the right that would go take to the streets with their guns, that's going to get put down really quick. So they're not going to be able to win that fight. And so there is something called the Insurrection Act. So if a state decided that they were going to rise up, then they could, the government would invoke the Insurrection Act, where they could send the army in to put that down. Because remember, their goal is to keep peace and to keep the Union together. Okay, so, and then 3. 3 is no quartering of soldiers. Remember, 3 is a crowd. No quartering of soldiers. So you're never going to have somebody come live with you. Okay, 4, you're going to do this. You're going to knock. That's the police wanting to come into your house, and you're going to say, show me the search warrant, right? So no unreasonable searches and seizures. You can let them in. If they wanted to come in, you can say, sure, come in and look around. Or you can say, you're going to need a search warrant. That's just, you just need to know your rights. 5, you have the right to remain silent. So remember, plead the 5th is going to be that. 6, right to a speedy trial. A lot of people waive that just so they can give their lawyers time to prepare a better trial. But you could say you have the right to a speedy trial and you want it over with. Okay, 7, that's the 20. That's the one that we don't use very much, because now it says you can go to trial over if somebody takes anything over $20, or sues you if you need to sue for anything over $20. Remember, that was a team of mules back then. Now we go to small claims court, so this really just is not really used much. We just have ways in our court system to handle that now. And then 8 is no cruel or unusual punishment. 9 is mine. You have more rights than what the Constitution gives you. And 10 is, if it's not mentioned in the Constitution, it's going to be pushed to the states to handle. So those are the top 10. They're the Bill of Rights. Okay, so the next ones, I'll try to find some fun ways for you to remember those 2, but the first 2 you're just going to have to memorize. Okay, so 11 is about lawsuits between the states. Okay, so, or against the states, lawsuits against the states. So if you're going to sue Tennessee, it can't be in a federal court. You're going to sue them in a state court. Okay, they didn't want to take sides between their children, so the big daddy says, okay, we're not going to handle this. You're going to sue it in state court. Handle it down there. I'm not going to handle lawsuits against the states. Okay, 12 is the method of presidential elections, and this is what we're seeing played out now, right? So even though we hear Joe Biden is the president-elect, we also know that will really happen on December 14th. That's when everybody goes to their state house and the electors cast votes for their state. Sorry, nobody's in here except my dog, and I don't think dogs can get corona. I hope not. Okay. So 12 is also the longest amendment that we have, because it really draws it out on how we're going to do these presidential elections. And so we do have a method of it, and this is just how it is, right? So we will know when the electors go and vote. Also, the Congress has to certify that. So the Congress does certify the electors' votes. All right, so 13, 14, and 15 are going to go together. So before I show it to you, 13, 14, 15 go together. They're called the Reconstruction Amendments, and they happen after the Civil War. So between 12 the 12th Amendment and the 13th Amendment, 61 years has passed. Okay, so we're now up to 1865 when we get the 13th Amendment. So it's been a long stretch before we ever needed another amendment. So they do 13, 14, and 15 are going to go together. And I want you to remember that. So I want you to say it together, like 13, 14, 15. So say it with me, 13, 14, 15. And you're going to remember that by free citizens vote. Can you say that? Free citizens vote. And that's how you're going to remember that. So the 13th Amendment frees the slaves. The 14th Amendment makes them citizens. And the 15th Amendment allows them to vote. We got all of these within 5 years. So between 1865 and 1870, we give the slaves the vote. Now, when I say here that they have the right to vote, at this point it's still just men. So just the slaves that are men, the ex-slaves that are men, can vote. The women still can't vote. We're going to get to that in a minute. So it's not every slave can vote, but the men. Okay? So you're going to remember 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote. And those go together. Okay. 16. Okay. You're going to remember this because what does every 16-year-old want in their birthday card? They want money. Money, money, money. So try to remember 16 as what you would have wanted in your birthday card at 16. You want money. So this gives the government the right to collect income tax. Okay, this will help them pay for wars and pay for roads and fund the government. Okay, so the 16th Amendment does give them the right to collect income tax. Okay, the 17th Amendment, the best way I can tell you is to try to start to spell 17. S-E, and then stop. Okay, so 17, you're going to try to spell it, and you're going to get to S-E, and you're going to stop, and that's going to remind you of Senate. Okay, this allows you to vote for your own senators now. Up until then, the state legislature voted for your senators. Part of that was because we did not have a very high literacy rate, and so they didn't trust people to be able to read and make their own informed decisions on who they wanted their senators to be. So they let the more educated people in the legislature vote for your senators. But by now in America, we have a high enough literacy rate to where they go, oh, okay, you're smart enough to vote for your own senators. So you get the 17th Amendment. And that's the reason we get to vote for our own senators now. I'm going to turn my phone off because people keep beeping me. Texting me. There. Okay. So 18 and 21 go together. So we're going to skip 19 and 20 for just a second. So we're going to do 18 and 21 together. And those are the drinking amendments, okay? Those are big ages. Try to remember that. That's big ages in kids' lives, 18 and 21. Everybody wants to be 18, then you want to be 21. And so those are the drinking amendments. Okay, so 18 outlawed alcohol. At the time, there was a big push. Women had a huge part of this because a lot of women were protesting that alcoholism was just ruining their families. Their men was hanging out at the bars all the time. And so they got 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of all states to agree that alcoholism was just awful. And I mean, not alcoholism, but alcohol was awful, and so they outlawed it. It caused a bunch of unintentional issues. Bootleggers, the mafia, underground people making booze, and so then they passed the 21st Amendment to give it back. So remember, that's how you change an amendment. You have to pass another amendment. So yes, we took away alcohol with the 18th Amendment, but then we made another one at 21 that gave it back. So if there's any amendments in here that they ever wanted to change, they would have to do that by making another amendment. And to make another amendment, you have to get 2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of all states, again, to agree. So that's what happened. So 18 outlawed booze, 21 gives it back. 19, that is my one-legged woman. Make it 19 and put some hair on it and a dress, and there you go. So that's going to remind you that this is the women's right to vote. Okay, so the 19th Amendment finally gives women of all colors the right to vote. Tennessee played a big part in this, and I wish that I could take you on the Capitol tour like I take every class every year, but we can't because of COVID. But they show you the room where this happened. We were the 3/4 of all states. We were the last state needed to ratify this. And so there was a guy who was set to vote no, and he was going to be the final vote, and it was not going to pass. And so he received a letter from his mom at the very last minute, and his mom urged him to vote yes, that women should be allowed to vote. And so he did. Mama won. And so he voted yes. And so they love to tell that story at the state capitol tour. And they show you, okay, this is the room where it happened. And so we're pretty proud of that as Tennesseans, that we were the last state to put it over the top. Okay, 20. You're going to remember this one easy because 20 means the 20th of January. Okay, so you're going to remember that. That's my calendar. I figured if I put in all the numbers, it might confuse you. So, this is when the president is going to be sworn in, and it is on January 20th. The original Constitution said March the 4th, and so that used to be how long it took. I mean, like, it would take them forever. We didn't have telephones, and we didn't have computers or voting booths that had results like this, right? So it would take them forever just to ride their little pony down to tell George Washington he was elected president, or, you know, it really did. It took them a very long time, and then they had to move up. I mean, when you read about, or I work at the Hermitage, and just how we had to get Andrew Jackson and his horse-drawn carriage back up to Washington. I mean, it took them forever. So it doesn't take them long anymore. So whenever we elect in November, we can have them sworn in by January 20th. We don't need to go to March the 4th anymore. So they thought that was too long, and they changed it. All right, 22. You're just going to look at those numbers, 2, 2, and you're going to remember no more than 2 terms for president. Okay, this was a tradition. Like, George Washington thought 2 terms was enough, and he just didn't do that anymore. And then after that, the presidents just kind of fell in line, and they did that, and they stuck with that tradition, no more than 2 terms. But then we get to FDR in World War II. He was president before and during World War II, and he didn't want to change, and there was nothing in the Constitution that actually said he couldn't. So he did, and he ran, and he ran 4 times and was elected 4 times. And so after that, they decided, okay, maybe we need to put something in place, because he died after he was elected the 4th time. And so they decided, well, we need to put something in place, or somebody could just keep going and going and going and going, and then they could be like a king or a dictator or whatever and just keep going, and that was not how they wanted us to be. So they made the 22nd Amendment. So no more than 2 terms. Now, I think we talked about this. The most anybody can serve is right at 10 years. And that's because, okay, let's just use Mike Pence and Donald Trump. So if Donald Trump had died in office after 2.5 years, Mike Pence would finish out that 1.5 years, and then he's allowed to run 2 more terms, right? So it would be 9.5 years that he could have possibly served. Okay, but if Donald Trump had died in office before 2 years, let's say after 1 year, and Pence finished out 3 years, he's not allowed to run 2 more times. He's only allowed to run 1 more time. So if it's 2 years or under, then he can run twice. If it's over, if he serves 2 years or over, then he can't. He can only run 1 more time. So I hope that makes sense. All right, so the next few are going to be rhyming ones. Okay, so you're going to remember 23 by rhyming it with DC. 23, DC. Remember that. 23, DC. That's because DC Washington, D.C., decided that they wanted some electoral votes, and so we didn't give them any senators, but they do have 3 electoral votes. We talked about that. They only get the amount of the smallest state, which is 3. Okay, so right now they only get the amount of the smallest state. Now, if they were to become a state, which they would love to be, because then they would get 2 senators. Then they would get 2 senators, and then they would get their electoral college by population, just like everybody else. But right now, while they're not a state, they can only get 3. Okay, 24 is going to remind you of no more. 24, no more. No more what? No more poll taxes. And you might say, what in the world is a poll tax? Poll tax, believe it or not, this is another part of our history that's just not great. There's places, especially in the South, that would charge to vote. Now, what they would do that for would be to keep maybe the minorities from voting. They would keep the poor people from voting. Even though we now have amendments to say every color can vote, right? We have every woman, by now it's every woman, and every color can vote. But if a place didn't want them to, then they would charge money to vote. And so what that did was it just said you cannot charge to vote anymore. And that way nobody is disenfranchised and everybody can vote for free. Because if you're poor, you're not going to have the money to go pay to vote. So they made that illegal. All right, 25, you're going to remember by still alive. 25, still alive. And you're going to think about the president. That tells you what happens if the president or the VP becomes disabled, or if they die, what happens in succession, right? Who succeeds them, right? Before, when Garfield was shot, he did not die right away. And it wasn't really that big of a deal because we weren't really a superpower. We didn't have nuclear weapons. We didn't have the influence that we have now. Now we can't go without a president or an acting president. We don't even go without that for an hour, right? That also is another thing. If a president is going to be put to sleep, for example, Bush had a colonoscopy. I think even Obama did the same thing during colonoscopy. Reagan had polyps removed from his colon. So I don't know what the deal is with colons, but they get put to sleep for their colonoscopies, and they will transfer power to the VP while they're asleep. So in case anything happens during the hour that I'm out, or the few hours that I'm out, you are going to be in charge. So that, the 25th Amendment tells how to do that. It also tells what happens if the president just can't do it. What if something happens and Biden really does have dementia and he can't one day do his duties because of no fault of his own, maybe if he had any kind of dementia, or what if the president had a stroke? What happens when they just can't do their duties? So the 25th Amendment explains what happens. So the vice president, so let's just say it's going to be Biden, Kamala Harris and half of the cabinet would have to get together and write a letter to Congress and say, I don't think he can do his duties. Okay, now this would be his friends, right? This would be the VP he picked and the cabinet he picked. So for them to do that, it would have to be pretty serious, right? So they would have to get together, the majority of the cabinet and the vice president has to agree, sends it to the Congress, right? Now the president has a chance to respond. What if he was fine and he thinks, you're just trying to take over? He can write a letter and say, no, I'm fine. And then Congress will decide. I think they will get together and say, okay, he says he's fine, and then they work it out. The Congress will decide. But he could say, yeah, I've had some medical problems and I can't do it. But what if the president gets kidnapped, or Air Force One disappears off the radar, or something like that? This is what the 25th Amendment is for, is how do we handle that? How do we handle whenever the president can't do his duties. Now, we have never used the 25th Amendment where the VP and the cabinet has had to do that. Okay, so we haven't had to do that. Now, Nancy Pelosi even talked about that whenever Trump had COVID. Like, okay, is he going to be able, to do his job? So she wanted to, and they've actually introduced a bill that allows, the 25th Amendment says that the VP and Congress, and half the cabinet can decide, or Congress can put together their own little group, right? We've never done that before. But if Congress decided that they wanted to vote for medical personnel, and I think that's what this bill says, like a lot of medical people are going to be looking at you and say, hey, can you really do this job? Are you fit to do this job mentally or, physically or whatever? They can do that. Now, that has never been done. And for Congress to pass that bill, what happens? It goes to the president to sign it. So if the president thinks they're trying to pull a fast one over on him, he's going to say no. So right now, Trump is still the president. So this bill that Pelosi has, if that was to somehow get through, right now it wouldn't because the Senate would be Republican. He's not going to sign that because he thinks he's fine. Now, she has said that this is not for Trump, that it is for maybe anywhere in the future that they would need that. But having a group of a lot of medical personnel wouldn't help you in every situation. For example, if the president was kidnapped, you don't need medical people trying to decide that, right? Trying to decide who's going to take over or whatever. So the 25th Amendment fixes that. What happens if they're incapacitated, if they can't do their job, if they die? What happens if the VP dies? If the VP dies, if you're wanting to know the answer to that, if the VP dies, the president gets to pick a new VP. It just has to be approved by Congress. So he or she has to be approved by Congress. All right, so next, 26. 26, you're going to add those together, and you're going to get 2 plus 6 is 18. You're going to remember it like that, okay? So I know it's not 18, but it's going to remind you. So you're going to say 2 plus 6 is 18. And this means that this is when it lowered the voting age to 18. It used to be 21, and Nixon agreed. Especially the Vietnam War kind of shone a lot of light into this because a lot of these kids, 18, 19, 20 years old, were going to Vietnam, dying for their country, coming home wounded, maimed, messed up, and they couldn't vote for their own commander-in-chief, for their own president. They can fight for their country, but they can't vote for the leader of it. That sounds a little crazy. So Nixon also agreed, and so he was for that. And so Congress passed that, and the states ratified it. So that is why you now can vote when you're 18. You've heard some talk that some people want it lowered to 16. If that was to happen, they could do that. They're just going to have to pass another constitutional amendment to lower that again. Okay, so 2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of all states would have to agree that a 16-year-old could make that decision. I don't know that that would go through right now. Okay, 27. There's no easy way to remember this one, sorry. 27 was the last one, and it was in 1992. Oh, that's when I graduated high school. That was from Clinton, and that was, I don't mean that the amendment was from Clinton. That was just during the Clinton administration. And that is saying that Congress can give themselves a pay raise, but they're going to have to be reelected before it takes effect. So that means they can't just vote to give themselves some exuberant salary, and then you be like, he's not worth that, or she's not worth that. So this says you get to say first, and you get to vote them back in, and if you vote them back in the next time that they're up for re-election, then they can get that raise that they voted. But until they're re-elected, either 2 or 6 years for their term, they can't get that raise. So that keeps Congress from just giving themselves constant raises. And you have nothing to do or say about it. Or giving them raises and they don't care if they get reelected because they're going to get paid so much money. So they're not going to do that. So that keeps kind of the check. So if you don't like them, you can vote them out. So, okay, so that's the 27 amendments. we will go over these even more, and hopefully I'll see you soon.